Good evening, everyone. Take your seats, please, Councillor Sunnox. Thank you. It's being live streamed and will be available for you after the meeting on the Council's YouTube channel. So, to begin with, just a few matters of housekeeping. Action in the event of an emergency. There are no practice alarms planned for this evening. So if an alarm sounds, please evacuate the grand jury room by going back through the main entrance and down the stairs or via the staircase at the side of the building and then to the car park behind the Town Hall in St Ronald Street. We may have a short break at 7:30 p.m. subject to the progress of business. Please would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone, and would participants please mute the microphones when not speaking. Okay, I will do introductions. I'll ask each member and officer around the table to introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Councillor Paul Smith, St Anne's and St John's Ward.
Councillor Richard Kirkby-Taylor, Castle Ward.
Councillor William Sunnox, Rural North Ward.
Lewis Barber, Lexington and Braeswick Ward.
Councillor Faith Smalls, Old Heath, The Hive and Rowhedge.
Pam Cox, Councillor for Newtown and Christchurch, subbing for Kaylee Rippingale.
Councillor Sarah Naylor, Lexington Braeswick Ward, also subbing for Paul Dundas.
Councillor Natalie Summers, St Anne's and St John's Ward, subbing for Councillor Michelle Barrows.
Councillor Mixbindler, Shrub End Ward.
Bethany Jones, Principal Planning Policy Officer.
Rachel Forkin, Principal Planning Policy Officer.
Sandra Scott, Place Strategy Manager.
Simon Cairns, Joint Head of Planning.
Karen Sire, Joint Head of Planning.
Robert Carmichael, Democratic Services Officer.
You're all very welcome. As has been mentioned, there are a few apologies for tonight. I'll just go through them again. Councillor Pam Cox is here for Councillor Kaylee Rippingale. Councillor Sarah Naylor is here for Councillor Paul Dundas. Councillor Natalie Summers for Councillor Michelle Burrows, and Councillor Faith Smalls for Councillor Lee Scordis. We move on to item 3, urgent items. Are there any? No urgent items. Declaration of interest. So by any councillors to declare any interest for any of the items on tonight's agenda. I am seeing no indications, so we will go to the minutes. I invite the committee to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 7th of August. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Now on to Have Your Say. We have some speakers on Have Your Say. General Have Your Say, all these? Yeah. So can we start with someone who's not unfamiliar to these meetings, and Councillor Nick Chilvers, if you would come forward and have your 3 minutes, please. You know the score, Nick. Bell after 2 and then another one after 3. And the time will start when you hit the button.
Thank you, Chairman. At the last local plan meeting, officers stated that the master plan for Middlewick would need to be informed by engaging with a high number of diverse residents who live near to the site and in the area. Good. You shouldn't just be listening to the usual faces like me. Engage with some young working ones with families. You also said you'd be open to more creative methods of seeking views. That would be presumably on health, well-being, community, social, transport infrastructure, as well as enhancing the biodiversity. A couple of things. The way the consultation questions, any consultation questions, are asked and what they cover are always controversial. And people can spot a steered survey a mile off and it ruins credibility. So I urge you to get the questions checked with our 6 ward councillors. Perhaps you could now give us an idea of when the researchers, and it was mentioned, perhaps some from the university, would be at key points around the area. So we can help alert people to what's going on, and you get a more meaningful response. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Councillor Harris, who at the last meeting took the committee through the obvious shopping list, his shopping list, what he called it. He mentioned community centre, health facilities, lots of open space, shops, good parking arrangements, and independent biodiversity assessment, and the recalculation of the highways transport model, which is apparently years out of date, and that is vital. With regards to that, I stress that it needs to look at travel patterns beyond up and down Mersey Road. With no employment on the Wick's doorstep, roads such as Old Heath Road, Whitehall, Bourne Road, Beerchurch Road need to be embraced in the survey. Some of those junctions and roads in that area are under considerable stress. Please ensure they're included. Because frankly, in my opinion, looking back, and I watched the Zoom sessions with the inspector, highways took a narrow view and were extraordinarily complacent at the inspector's inquiry. So we hope we've moved them up a gear. Thank you. There were a couple of questions there.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Anybody from the officer side wish to address those? Sandra?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for those comments. I think there's some very, very valid suggestions and ideas that you put forward. When we're at the stage to carry out consultation on the master plan, then to work with the various agencies and stakeholders on the relevant evidence base to inform that master plan, then there's a lot of useful suggestions that you've made in what you've said. The timing of where we are at the moment is we're not at that point at the moment. And when we are, then I can assure you that full engagement in as many different ways and creative ways as possible is something that we are very keen to do on taking the master plan forward, and there will be more work undertaken, including on transport and highways, working with our colleagues on those points and all the other key areas of concern for that site. Thank you.
Nick, you have another minute if you wish to use it.
I'll just say to the committee, look, I'm always grateful for the being allowed to have a say in here. I'm sure you understand that when people like me sit in this chair, we can only touch on headline points really in 3 minutes. We can't go into the subtle arguments, detail or offer evidence. But be assured there are people out there amongst us who do have experience of formal business meetings in a variety of settings, who can make a constructive contribution around a table without dwelling on the past, getting political or getting emotional. And regarding the WIC, there are local people who have ecological expertise and some residents who have good local knowledge beyond what CCC has and know what questions to ask and topics to explore. And with the best will in the world, even our ward councillors won't know everything. So if asked, some of us will work with ward councillors in a thoughtful manner to achieve a master plan that complies with the inspector's instructions. We don't bite and we're not all
Come on, Nick,
bonkers.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, and we'll encourage everybody to respond to the consultation. A lot of good points made, and we encourage everybody, all groups, all experts, to give us their views. That's what we're all about, and then we can make a decision based on good information. Next, have your say speaker is Mr. Richard Martin. Richard, I know you've been before as well. You know the score, 3 minutes, Bells after 2 and then 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Last week saw the publication of the fourth State of Nature report, the product of a collaboration of environmental NGOs, academic institutions and government agencies, including Natural England. The report provides the most comprehensive overview ever of species trends across the UK. The report makes compelling reading. It lays bare the stark fact that nature is seriously declining across the UK, a country that is already one of the most nature depleted in the world. The data shows that since 1970, UK species have declined by about 19% on average, and nearly one in 6 species are now threatened with extinction. This is a timely reminder, if we needed it, that the nature crisis isn't restricted to far off places like the Amazon or the Great Barrier Reef. It is right here on our doorstep. We are losing familiar wildlife we cherish, including the hazel dormouse and skylarks. I would suggest the committee read this report. Earlier this year, Essex Moth Group, part of the Essex Field Club, held meetings over Middlewick. They continue to find nationally scarce species such as the white spotted pinion and the large velvet ant. In the summer meetings, one session alone caught 260 species and another later on caught 160 species. All this in areas deemed in the official local plan report as not as biodiverse as other parts of Middlewick. Now, the inspector has said in his report that a 10% increase in biodiversity on site must happen with the developer Middlewick. Would the committee like to explain how they will achieve this and the figures recorded, or explain how they will achieve all of the inspector's conditions laid down in his report? I have noticed in the meeting tonight you'll be discussing the review of the local plan options of biodiversity net gain sites. Surely Middlewick is the prime option in Colchester. Has anyone asked the MOD, DIO about this option for Middlewick? If not, why not? Also, in the call for sites, it asks that has a preliminary ecological appraisal or biodiversity metric calculation been carried out. It is good to see that lessons have been learnt from previous mistakes, but we all know the biodiversity metric score can be fudged to suit landowners and other parties' aims. One last thing, there is a local photographer called Andrew Neal. He has been shortlisted in the British Photographic Awards for a photo he took recently. I bet you can't guess where it was taken.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Officers, anybody want to address those points? Sandra, you again? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just on the general point about all the ecological interest that's being found that you've referred to by the various groups doing the surveys. I think as you refer to the need for further update on evidence on ecology and other matters will need to be carried out to inform master planning, and that is intended to happen at the appropriate time and will use to inform how things get taken forward in the master planning at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. You have another minute if you wish to use it.
Yes, please. I'd just like to add comments to what Nick has said. We have 3,500 followers on our social media groups. Many of them are local residents. Perhaps it might be a one-sided view, but if any of you would like to come onto the group and put any questions, you are more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you can rest assured that all the members of this council are concerned about ecology, nature, flora and fauna, and we will take that into account at any decisions that we make across party. No, just have your say. So move on to the next have your say speaker, Alan Short, please.
Good evening. I went to the Sustainability and Ecology Committee earlier, or the end of last month, because I'm very concerned that the draconian conditions laid down by the inspector for the Wick site will be properly met, that they will be properly monitored by the council to make sure that the developer does these and does them before the development takes place. Because we have too many instances where conditions are laid on development after they're built, and then they never get done, and enforcement of them becomes extremely difficult. We have examples in the past where this has happened, and it's very difficult to enforce something that is very expensive after the event. The chair of the Sustainability and Environmental Committee asked me to come here to raise these issues with you, to ask how these are going to be enforced, and will they be enforced beforehand. It's quite clear that the council believe that the way to do development is the garden village way, where you get the infrastructure and the important things done before you start building the houses. And that would be a good plan to start with in terms of the WIC, that we get the biodiversity improved, we get the replacement biodiversity and other factors laid down by the inspector before any of the houses go up. The chair of the Sustainability and Environmental Committee has agreed to come with me to the Cabinet to raise these issues with them, to see that we get a proper assurity that these issues will be taken into account, will be actually discussed with the developer. The plans to produce them and meet them are done before the development even starts.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. I think we can give you that assurance that we are infrastructure first as a council and as a committee. Sandra, anything to add?
Just briefly, I think it's probably fair to say that the policy in the local plan on the Middlewick Ranges site is very detailed and fairly prescriptive in what the requirements are, which includes a master plan to be agreed before the planning application is submitted. So I think the requirements, no developer can be left unclear about what the expectation is and what the ask is and what's required in order to come forward with an acceptable scheme on that site. And the policy is very detailed in what the ask is, and I think through the planning committee and the role of the council in considering any future proposals that come forward, all the tools are there to make sure that everything is done as is envisaged and expected in order, if the scheme's to be approved, that's acceptable.
Thank you, Sandra. Mr. Short, you have another minute if you wish to use it.
Thank you for that assurance. I'll be coming here over the next few years to make sure that that actually happens.
Thank you very much. Councillor Barber, I may have been a bit premature. Did you want to ask a question of Mr. Martin, or were you making a comment?
I was just going to ask a question on the Middlewick master plan.
You can bring that up.
Is that all right to do it later? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll allow that. But yeah, if you say it's only, have you say speakers, we can ask questions of them. But yeah, I was reminded by the acting deputy chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. Our final have your say speaker is John Crookenden. Mr. Crookenden, please come forward. You have 3 minutes. Bell will sound after 2, and then you have to stop speaking as soon as you can after the second bell after 3 minutes. This time will start when you hit the button. Thank you.
Right, okay. Good evening. I'm a member of the Great Tay Neighbourhood Plan Group. I believe the adopted Section 1 and Section 2 local plans are due to be reviewed shortly, and the process will include a new calls for sites. In my view, this should be limited to a review of the policies to make sure that they comply with current legislation which has been passed since the adoption of the local plan. There is no need for new calls for sites or an increase in housing numbers. Our group was told by a policy officer that these were required due to technical changes to the NPPF. If this is true, the reasons must be explained in a transparent manner. My understanding from other sources is that changes were expected in the spring of 2023 and have still not been published. Surely it is in everybody's best interests that no decisions are made until that document has been published by government. Our residents and yours are tired of endless consultations, writing responses, all of which are consistently ignored. North East Herts is different. It has persuaded an inspector to agree to reduce housing numbers. This council should and must resist interference from government to build more and more houses. This council has built its share and there has been no corresponding infrastructure support. This cannot and must not continue. Tonight's chair, Tim Young, was a strong supporter of this approach in the past. In future, I suggest, councillors must be given access to all documents and reports well ahead of all meetings. This was not the case when the current number was discussed originally some years ago. Any timetable must allow for slippage to ensure that councillors have adequate time to think and prepare for discussion. Infrastructure costs must be calculated correctly, include a realistic contingency allowance, and built first. Neighbourhood plan groups need to be supported throughout the process. This was not the case in our development of the plan, and we were criticised and told that our consultation on the New Barn Road development was inadmissible because the plan was insufficiently advanced.
Thank you, Mr. Crookenden. You'll have another minute afterwards, but I will ask Karen Syrett to respond to the points you've made already.
Thank you. There was a number of different points raised there. The first point covered the extent of the review of the local plan, which was a decision taken at the previous meeting in August. So the principle of reviewing the local plan has already been established. In terms of complying with changes to national policy, I think that was probably set out in that report, but I've not got to it quick enough. But the NPPF published in 2019 required us to adopt a different approach to defining housing numbers and housing targets. So it could be argued that our local plan is already out of date with the 2019 NPPF, which introduced the standard methodology. However, we submitted earlier and we were allowed to proceed on the basis of the 2012 NPPF. So our plan does hold weight for the full 5 years. Any review, however, and it has to be completed within that 5 years, must take account of changes in legislation. And you'll have seen not only changes in legislation, but also national policy. And you'll probably have seen another report on the agenda tonight covering the latest government thinking on planning reforms and plan making. So that has introduced some changes to what we expected late last year, but it's still suggesting changes which require our plan to be reviewed and updated. And any review of housing numbers has implications for the remainder of the plan, because it does necessitate a call for sites, it does necessitate a review of all the supporting infrastructure, because we cannot have housing alone, and I'm sure we'll hear about that later on. In terms of councillors being allowed sufficient time to review papers, I think we always publish documents well in advance of the meetings. We're very strict about that, and I would like to think that councillors put themselves forward for appropriate meetings in the knowledge that they can review the papers within the timescales. So anyone putting themselves forward for planning committee, for example, knows they have to review reports every 3 weeks. So it's a lot more time. And in terms of a neighbourhood plan group, I'd have to beg to differ with your opinion about support. Forgive me if I've got the date wrong, but It's been quite a number of years since the neighbourhood plan area for Great Tay was designated. And it is unfortunate that the plan doesn't seem to have been taken forward to the extent that many others have. And all the other ones are now carrying full weight in the decision-making process. But neighbourhood plans are the plans of the local community. We are not there to write them for groups. That would completely undermine the whole premise of neighbourhood planning. So we will continue to support the group, and I think following a number of meetings which I've attended, Sandra's attended, Beth's attended, Lucy's attended, these are different meetings by the way, not just one, then we've got some suggestions as to how we might better tailor that support, I think, to enable the plan to proceed at a faster pace and therefore gather more weight in the decision-making process. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Mr. Crickenden, you have another minute.
Thank you, Chair. I accept most of that, Karen, but this council did not support the Great Tay Neighbourhood Plan Group for 2 years. And that's one of the principal reasons why we didn't make a great deal of progress. And then, I don't want to talk about Newbourne Road here, but I'll do that at the planning committee. But we were told, Chair, at a meeting that Karen came to, that the consultation which we undertook with our residents was not valid because our plan was sufficiently advanced. However, if you look at it logically, all the responses, if they'd written to the council as individuals, they would have been considered as individuals. So to me, it's a complete nonsense to say that because the plan is not sufficiently advanced, that they would be ignored and not taken into account and given no weight.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Crickenden. You've had 1 minute 13 seconds, so I've been lenient with you.
Thank you, Tim.
Karen, do you wish to come back at all on that?
I think that's probably blurring the lines between the neighbourhood plan and the consultations on the planning application. So we can, we have covered that outside of this meeting. And the same point about the weight afforded will apply, but we can pick that up again if need be before the planning application.
Lines of communication will remain open, Mr. Crickenden. I'm sure you have the email addresses of the relevant officers, and I'm happy to be copied into any responses if that would help, and I'm sure the group spokespersons would be the same. Okay, that's all our Have Your Say speakers, so we'll move on to item 7, approach to the Colchester Local Plan Review. What I'm going to do, we have a statement from the portfolio holder, but what I'm going to do is ask the, it's Sandra, isn't it, to introduce, and then we'll hear from Councillor Luxford-Vaughan. I think, Robert, you're going to read out Councillor Luxford-Vaughan's statement, which I don't think any of us have seen in advance. Has anybody seen Councillor Luxford-Vaughan's statement in advance? No, so we'll hear that after Sandra's introduced the report.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. Members will recall that a report to Local Plan Committee in June set out the need for a local plan review, referring to the legislative requirement to review it at least every 5 years. In August, the committee agreed to take an iterative approach to the issues and options. That report also set the scene for the likely scope of the local plan review and range, extent and timing of evidence, approach to engagement and a high-level programme for the review. The previous reports also refer to the considerations which are relevant to the scope on the local plan review, including updated evidence needs. This report takes this forward, expanding on the themes which will be subject to iterative engagement for the issues and options. These include creating a better environment, developing a vision, climate change, design and placemaking, and health and wellbeing. Embedded in plan making is identifying the infrastructure needs, this critical evidence work provided at the optimum time through the infrastructure audit and the infrastructure delivery plan, forming an integral part to plan making, which will inform part of the justification for the sustainable development options and delivery. Initial engagement on evidence-based focused on the city's green network and waterways is due to commence later this month, early on. This will also provide stakeholders with the chance to propose opportunities to improve and enhance spaces and networks and the green infrastructure. The report suggests that the local plan review should start with creating a better environment based on the green network and waterways evidence and opportunities. This approach is based on the principle that it allows for the very best understanding of the constraints and opportunities for creating a better environment and plan for growth needs, including key infrastructure and placemaking on from there. It is considered that this approach provides benefits to local communities, health and well-being, wildlife and climate change, and link that to the strategy for development to enable its delivery and provide the best outcomes for placemaking. Members are asked to agree to this approach to the local plan review of using the green network and waterways and creating a better environment agenda as a starting point for the key purpose of the local plan review. Thank you very much, and I'm sure there'll be questions and discussion.
I'm sure there will, but we'll start with the statement from Councillor Luxford-Vaughan, who is the portfolio holder, and I'll ask Robert to read that out for us, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, item 7, approach to the Colchester local plan review. The best plans start from a review of what its existing infrastructure provides, including transport networks and employment sites, and then builds on these to determine where the gaps are and where homes would be best situated. Any subsequent call for sites is tailored to facilitate this framework. The preservation and enhancement of existing green and blue infrastructure and the creation of new ones is also essential for a sustainable local plan. My frustration with the previous local plan was that it appears to have been approached from the opposite way round, where landowners put forward sites and the subsequent strategy was then manipulated to suit these locations. We are in a far more critical situation now. Our current local plan relies on investment in existing infrastructure that is yet to be secured. A significant example of this is the upgrades to the A120, which we assume would go ahead and hasn't, or a RES that is yet to demonstrate that it is more rapid than using a car, and a link road that it was supposedly of strategic importance and could release land for housing, but now doesn't link to anything. A strong focus on green networks and waterways is in the plan is of course completely welcomed, and it may even be the right place to start regarding public consultation. However, I think it is an illogical place to start a planning exercise, where transport and jobs are far more dominant factors in our daily lives and relate directly to where we live. The infrastructure audit that was commissioned by the previous portfolio holder, I believe, was one of the most important pieces of work to prepare us for this local plan review and should form the basis for any future strategy. We are all aware that there is an infrastructure deficit in Colchester and the wider area, and this needs to be resolved. Health and wellbeing reviews are also welcome. However, as health facilities are commissioned once demand is present, i.e. the houses have been built, they can end up being vague and non-committal, either concentrating on healthy living or identifying where existing services have capacity. This review needs to predict and commit to where these new services will go. My recommendation, therefore, will be not to sign off on this approach, but to say that it should be led by an infrastructure audit, whilst ensuring that the core value of the plan is that it creates a better environment that respects the climate emergency.
Thank you. That's the statement from Councillor Luxford-Vaughan. I've got to state that I am very disappointed that we're hearing that for the first time tonight. It wasn't sent round to the committee to consider, so we're hearing that. You know, the papers have been out for some time, at least a week, haven't they?
Yes, Chair. The papers were published with 5 clear working days in advance. I'd just like to point out that that was received about 10 minutes before the start of the meeting, so couldn't have been circulated to yourself.
No, I understand that. I'm not blaming the officers. I think it would have been a courtesy for the portfolio holder to at least speak to the chair and group spokespersons before issuing a statement that, you know, we can't digest. We haven't got it in front of us. We just have to listen to it. We just listen to it. I'm not going to be asked for it to be printed off. It will be sent to you after the meeting. And yeah, I just think we should all register our disappointment that that's coming just 10 minutes before we start our deliberations on the item. Right, do you wish to respond to before I bring members in, do you wish to respond to the statement? Karen.
Thank you. I think just a few comments perhaps to clarify some of the points raised. The first one being that the last meeting of this committee agreed unanimously to support the approach outlined in the report on issues and options engagement. They also agreed unanimously the approach to engagement and consultation. So then if I turn to the report itself, paragraph 5.11 talks about the first stage of consultation being around a green network and waterways, and that the plans would be published online. And as Sandra said, that's still due to be the case later this month. 5.12, the next stage of work will be a call for sites. So again, this committee supported that approach just 2 months ago. Prior to that meeting in August, we did brief Cabinet on the approach, and overall Cabinet supported the approach that's outlined in those reports. The portfolio holder was also briefed last week, so didn't raise these issues then. So we will pick it up with her after the meeting if there's particular issues that she's concerned with. I think there's some issues in what was just read out that we probably all agree on. I think we probably all agree that there's a need for infrastructure, and there's a need for infrastructure to support new development. We probably all agree that we need evidence to support the infrastructure provision so that we can better plan for it. And if Cabinet sign off the funding for the infrastructure audit, that will be commissioned. This is intended to run alongside any other consultation, starting with the blue and green infrastructure consultation and the call for sites. There's no reason that this needs to be one step in an otherwise agreed programme. It does, after all, I think, underpin all the themes that are listed in the local plan and the approach that was discussed at the last meeting. So I think that's all I want to say at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I know we've got 2 members of the Cabinet on this committee tonight. Rob, they presumably don't have any interest to declare?
No, Chair. As the local plan committee is a decision-making body in itself, and Cabinet have not been asked. They may have been asked to give a steer, but that's not a decision that would preclude them from voting upon it tonight.
Okay, Natalie and Paul, that clears that up for you two. And can I just clarify that the approach to the local plan review is a decision for this committee? That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay, so we have powers, statutory powers to go ahead whichever way we decide. I've got 2 speakers from the from the committee already. Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sandra and Karen, for your comments. I've long agreed with Councillor Luxford-Vaughan on numerous aspects of the local plan, but it does cause us difficulties in having a Cabinet member with a view that contrasts the recommended option this evening, and that causes me issues in the sense of I'm worried if there's going to be I take the point of, and it's good clarification that we run separate from cabinet, but it does obviously cause me concerns that there'll be a clash at some point between those two decision-making parts of the council and how resource allocation, officer time, etc., will be allocated. So I think, in my view, even if it's clearly not going to be tonight, it would be quite useful if group spokes and the chair, if not the wider committee, have an offline conversation with a cabinet member, regardless of the decision this evening, just to run through some of the points raised in the letter and any issues we want to raise as a committee. I think that can be offline for the time being. I don't think it has to necessarily be in a public forum. So that'd be quite useful to have that discussion sooner rather than later. If possible, please, chair, officers, cabinet members on the panel this evening. On the specifics of the report itself, I think it's good to see some of the priorities set out in here. My first question is, and I presume not, because we've already adopted it as a policy, but the government announcement on BNG won't have any material difference to what we're doing because it's only a delay rather than a drop. So I've seen nods, so I'll take that as confirmed. Just on the green and blue infrastructure point, it would be quite useful, I think, piece of work as part of the local plan review to see what our cycle network is like in Colchester, because I was surprised when I had the deputy role at Highways at Essex that there is not actually one conclusive list of highways or cycle paths, both on the highway network and perhaps on private estates, for example, in Colchester. So highways actually don't know exactly the extent of cycle infrastructure in Colchester. So it would be quite useful if we could maybe work with them as part of the review to check where that is so we have a full understanding. On a perhaps slightly parochial point, just looking at some of the key objectives which we need to consider, it'd be really useful to look at some of our tourism hotspots as well that have emerged, particularly since COVID. So I know areas such as Mersey and Dedham have always had high levels of tourism, but that's exploded to an extent where some of the infrastructure is struggling, public rights of way, waterways, etc. So if we could have a look at those areas, that'd be really useful. But hopefully that's some constructive points, but otherwise I think the broad focus is welcome, and unless I hear views to the contrary, I think I'm supportive of this part of the certainly this part of the agenda this evening.
Thank you, Lewis. I certainly can say that I'm very willing to open up discussions with the portfolio holder and cabinet members as local plan chair, and would welcome other members of the committee to have that meeting. I think you're right, maybe offline at first and see where we get to. Exchange of views is always good. Officers, do you want to answer the other points, please? Karen?
Yeah, I'll start if Sandra's got anything else to add. In terms of the cycle network, Essex County Council have just consulted on cycle network for Colchester, and I think it went beyond, and also walking routes. We have commented that we think it could go further. So we're already engaging on those specific areas, so recognise and agree with what you've suggested. And in terms of tourism hotspots, we've certainly had policies in the past focused on Dedham. It led to the creation of the car park in Dedham to relieve some of the pressure there. And we've had policies specific to Mersey. So if there's a need, we can certainly look at those in the future as well.
Lovely, thank you.
Sandra, anything to add? No, that's fine. Thank you, Lewis. Councillor Sonics.
Yes, I'm really sorry, but I didn't attend the local plan in August, and you can blame me for being behind the game, but we've been told there's an iterative approach to the plan. And that means, to me, that means that we don't just say, oh, it's decided a meeting and that's it. I really would like to, and I raised in previous correspondence before this meeting, I raised almost all the points coming from Councillor Luxford-Vaughan, and I feel that she is right to raise them and try and put the focus on the fundamentals of housing numbers and infrastructure. And if that's just been pushed through at a meeting that in the holiday period that some people, including myself, didn't attend, then I'm really upset about it, and I think that must be raised again. Okay, so then going on, the OAN. As I understand it, our OAN is 920 dwellings per annum, And I've always regarded that as a very high figure. And I remember looking at it a number of years ago, and there was an economic adjustment and assumptions about job generation in Colchester that were wildly optimistic, as we're a net exporter of jobs. And I thought that was a really high figure. And of course, with such a high figure, we've generated high numbers of housing, we've generated high population growth, and we put ourselves right in the centre of the target for the standard method, which basically extrapolates forward. And we find that under the standard method, I think it's 1061 is the figure. Someone may be able to know better. So we've suddenly got an increase in OAN. And we've got tendering sitting next door, managing to, or saying that they're going to hang on to their figure of 550. So we'll be doing almost half the number of houses per annum of tendering next door. And the question for this committee and for the council is whether we're going to try and resist the increase in OAN, or whether we're just going to put our hands up and continue building houses without infrastructure. We have to, in my view, resist that flywheel. We're the biggest builders in Essex by far, and our infrastructure really is far behind. And then going on to infrastructure, we need that infrastructure audit. We've been promised it for ages. We've been told that the budget wasn't withdrawn, so I don't know what we're waiting for. We need to get on with it. And it's just absolutely fundamental to it. And we ought to be concentrating on that. We ought to be concentrating on how we get better at actually collecting what we're entitled to collect. I'm personally very keen that if Essex County Council won't write a decent developer's guide that tells developers what infrastructure contributions they make, that we should do it ourselves. And that should be an important part of the plan. I mean, the Essex County Council one, just for those who've not seen it, is pretty punchy on education contributions, but all the other ones are just a whole load of waffle that don't really get us anywhere. We need to get much better at that, and we also ought to look at a SIL, or the new infrastructure levy that's heading down the road, which I think will require much of the same groundwork. Last point is that with the changing legislation, why on earth are we rushing so fast to do our plan? And why are we resisting the suggestion that the plan ought to be, and this comes to a point later in the day, that the plan ought to be completable in 30 months. I feel that we should take a breather. We've only just adopted the last plan. We should take a breather, and we should concentrate on that infrastructure audit while we've got a gap to do it, and we should revisit the plan review when we know more about the legislation, and that when we do the plan review, we should try and change a few commas and call it a review rather than it. I mean, what we're proposing here seems to almost start again. We start again with a new OAN. We start again with a new call for sites. Now we're uprooting our green and blue infrastructure. You know, what's going to be left of the previous plan? Why are we uprooting everything? And of course, as a ward councillor, this is going to hit us hard in the villages. So there's a few points there. I'll listen carefully.
Thank you, Councillor Sunnox. Just a reminder about how democracy works in this council. If this is a decision-making body of the council, as you heard earlier, and if you miss a meeting, there is nothing stopping you writing in submission. So the decision was made in August. We can't look at decisions again for another 6 months. You know, you had your chance, and it looks like you missed it. But officers, please respond to the other points. Karen, do you want to start?
Yeah, that was a lot of issues covered in a short space of time, so I'll try and cover as many as I can. It is an iterative approach that we're suggesting, but I don't think it's appropriate for us to revisit every decision that the committee has made before, because we'd never get anywhere. I think what you were suggesting about moving away from housing numbers being the starting point is exactly what we're trying to do with this different approach to the local plan. We want to start from a completely different angle. We want to start from the green and blue, the waterways infrastructure, and use that as the basis in the first instance. And then there's a number of other themes, as I said, that were picked up at the previous committee. You mentioned half the number of tendering. I think you're assuming you meant double the number of houses that tendering are being asked. Sandra's got a bit more information on that, so I'll pass over to her. Again, I said earlier on, I think there's an awful lot, but we probably all have in common, and we all want to ensure. And one of those is about an appropriate housing number for Colchester. But what I can't do is change government policy. The government are still committed to delivering 300,000 homes, new homes a year. And neither have they indicated that they're going to change the way that the housing targets are calculated. They're intent on using the standard methodology for the time being. So what we need to do is prepare an evidence base which demonstrates why we might make an exceptional move away from that standard methodology. So it's exactly, I think, doing what you want us to do. It's certainly very different from what we've done before. The infrastructure audit, it may be promised, but we didn't promise to do it immediately because we promised to do it to inform the local plan review, which is what's happening now. The council, like many others, are in a difficult financial situation, and therefore all carry forwards from the previous financial year are being carefully scrutinised. Officers started to do some of the initial work themselves to avoid having to commission external work, but resources will only allow a certain amount of that work to be undertaken in-house. You'll be pleased to hear that we've spoken to Essex County Council about undertaking some work in relation to SIL, and that work will look at how much money can be generated through use of SIL, what sort of levy that we can impose, and what that will generate in relation to the Section 106 that we're generating at the current time. So that will give us a good evidence base to decide whether we want to implement SIL or the infrastructure levy if that comes into being. In terms of the plan review, I think we've probably covered that already, and not sure why we would delay it when there is so much uncertainty in the plan making system at the moment. As you said, there's a report in later on in the agenda, but this is a follow-up consultation. We've already had one. How long do we wait? You know, the local plan will go out of date. We circulated to all members of this committee last week the legislation that requires us to have undertaken a review of the local plan within 5 years. So do we wait and then face the possibility that we can't achieve it? I think we undertake the evidence base and the consultation that's been set out and then progress from there. Sandra, have you got some more information on the tendering housing numbers, please?
Yeah, I have. I'll just finish on that point now and add that I think in the final point that Karen made about how long do we wait, I think everything so far that's coming out in relation to the changes that are being made have slipped. The BNG implementation has also slipped. So I think, you know, waiting is a risky strategy, I think, because we, you know, the uncertainty itself is probably the biggest challenge. So yes, on housing numbers, in terms of tendering, no, as I understand it, I've spoken with the head of planning today just to see if there was any change that we were unaware of with their intentions with their local plan review. No formal decision has been made on housing numbers at tendering at all. They have had one verbal report that's minuted at a meeting relatively recently on the fact that they need to do a local plan review, and similar to our June report, really, that sets out the types of issues that inform the need and extent of review. and like us, their plan submitted at the same time as our plan, the current plan 2017, relying on the OAN. The position in the need to review evidence on housing that applies to us equally applies to tendering. So their discussions on housing numbers, I think, are yet to come in terms of what that means and the evidence and how the use of the how they would review it in the context of how they wish to take their local plan review forward. But nothing formally has been decided, and that was said to me by the head of planning today. So I think, you know, they're in the same position as we are, and as far as we understand it, in terms of the rules that apply to when and how local plan review needs to be done in the context of housing numbers.
Thank you, Sandra and Karen. Sorry to pop out due to the lateness of the bus. I didn't have time to have a comfort break before I came in. I'll bring you back in after I've heard from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other speakers. Councillor Sunnox, Councillor Smith, you're next.
Thank you. First of all, I think it would be very helpful to have a reminder of the timeline. So when was our local plan approved? So when our 5 year starts counting from? How long did it take us to do the last local plan? Because I remember that we had this plan that we were going to get the local plan done very quickly, and it didn't work like that. So I think there's a very strong case for doing as much work as we can on the local plan as early as possible. And certainly sections like this, which effectively stand alone, would be very useful. I do see a lot of sympathy in the call for sites being delayed, because what we're looking at, we don't know exactly what we want from the infrastructure audit for where the shortfalls are. And that may well surely impact on which sites we select, or indeed which sites might come forward. If we decide that we want a particular characteristic, that might be something good that we need to do. I'm going to also say something a little bit controversial on housing numbers, with my housing portfolio hat on, and that is we currently have 315 families in temporary accommodation in Colchester. That's more than our total temporary accommodation stock. Of those 315 families, 70 of them are in bed and breakfast. And almost half of those 70 are not even in bed and breakfast accommodation in Colchester. It's very interesting when you talk about tendering numbers. I know tendering had very similar situation and very similar statistics. So there is clearly a need for a lot of social housing in the area. Whether we've got the balance right is a question. How that impacts on numbers is not for us to decide at this stage, but we certainly do need to be providing more social housing, so we don't have to do as ward councillor after ward councillor has had to do, with people coming to them facing eviction saying, I'm sorry, all the council can offer you and your family is bed and breakfast accommodation miles away, with the impact that has on your job, your family life and what have you. Can I also raise on section 5.7 in the report, you talk about health and wellbeing engagement, and the officers intend to hold a workshop with health and wellbeing professionals. I think we should be a little bit wider with who we're talking to here. What about the users of the service rather than the professionals as to what they need?
As well as.
Sorry, absolutely, yes, as well as, because I think there are serious issues with health provision, dentistry, doctor surgeries and what have you, and it may well be that the medical professionals' views of what they think is best is not necessarily what the patient's views are, and I think we should be capturing those views as well. So I'd like to see that put in there. But say finally, it would be helpful if we just have that recapitulation as to exactly what the timelines are, please.
Just to keep you on the right side of the regulations, Councillor Smith, you can speak as a substitute member of the local plan committee who happens to be the portfolio holder for housing. You can't speak as the portfolio holder for housing.
Oh, thank you so much. Of course, I wasn't.
Robert's sort of giving me a
nudge.
Yeah. Okay, a number of points there. Who wants to start on those, Sandra?
I can't give you the precise number of years it took to do the last local plan from start to finish, but it was a lot more than 30 months. I think 7 years plus is probably the stage we're now thinking to adoption is probably what we're talking about. As you know, we have 2 dates for adoption for the plan, our current plan. Section 1 was adopted in February 2021 and Section 2 in July 2022. In terms of the driver for what needs to require review, we need to be guided by the adoption of Section 1 because that's the plan that has the strategic policies in, which is what the requirement is to frame the review. Obviously, it's more usual to have one plan that has both, but in our case, our strategic policies, local planning policies, are in Section 1. So that's what is driving the 5-year period is 2026 from Section 1. The programme that it is only a high-level programme that, based on this iterative approach that we're talking about, takes us to submission around before June 2025. But it is a very high. It's just there's not much give in the 30 months in the programme that we're working at this current stage.
Karen, just a brief, concise point.
Yeah, just one point about the call for sites. The call for sites gives no status to any site put forward. I just want to make that clear. Certainly, we can discard any or all sites put forward at this stage.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Councillor Smith. Councillor Pam Cox.
Thank you, Chair. I agree that the timing of the portfolio holder's statement before the meeting is unfortunate. It'd be interesting to know from those who are in the Cabinet here whether that's a personal statement or a collective statement, but maybe we'll let that rest for now. I welcome the review process as set out in the document. It seems reasonable to me, and from what I've heard of officers' responses so far, I'm even more persuaded of that. I completely agree that we need to focus on infrastructure and we need infrastructure audits, and for my money they always need to include childcare provision as standard with infrastructure. I also agree with Councillor Smith's comments about the need for social housing. I have two areas I'd like to get some clarification on. One is that absolutely welcome the focus on environment, climate change within this review process. How will our review process connect with the climate change SPD and with the Essex Climate Action Commission's work that's been ongoing, and in particular with the Essex Design Guide? And how can we make that binding on developers as soon as possible? Because I'm personally facing, I would say, some pushback from developers in my own ward who seem reluctant to take on some of the demands made by that Essex Design Guide. So what's the status of the Essex Design Guide in these deliberations? Second one is slightly different, but if you'll forgive me, it's about heritage and how do we make space for protecting our heritage assets in this review. And I ask because it seems to me that our current frameworks for protecting and enhancing our heritage have been found wanting recently. And again, I'm referring to the same development, which is the development of the Abro site behind the Roman Circus. You may have missed this, but Heritage England wrote an 8-page, very strongly worded objection letter as a statutory consultee to the proposals put forward by the developer. And they have found the proposed development wanting in several respects. They call it a missed opportunity, but they also, more importantly, say that it's if it went ahead in its current form, it would actively damage the heritage assets in that area. So we seem to have safeguards. We have an Adborough development plan. We have a Roman Circus working plan, but they don't seem to be strong enough at present to resist the demands of developers to be able to do this particular, develop this thing in a particular way. So one of my questions is, in the way that the Essex Climate Commission can be of use to us in helping us with the Essex Design Guide work, could something like the Essex Cultural Strategy, recently developed by Essex County Council, also be helpful in helping us to review our local plan, where development very, very directly butts up against our heritage, and that's mostly in the city centre, but not only in the city centre. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Sandra first and then Karen. Sandra.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you very much. I think in terms of the SPD for climate change and the work of the Climate Commission and the climate change team at Essex, which has recently got some additional resource, I think, are doing a significant amount of work on how planning can kind of keep a pace with the evidence and the changes and the legislative change on climate change. I think the local plan review actually presents an opportunity to actually do a lot more than the plan can currently is able to go. The adopted plan was obviously is a product of its time, and it was submitted, as you know, in 2017, and the whole kind of agenda and the context of the even national level that's coming out on the climate change agenda has moved on significantly. So I think the SPD as a draft document, it takes things as far as it can within the context of the adopted local plan. But I think any new evidence, all the work that's being done by the Climate Commission and other, any other sources will be exactly the type of evidence and opportunities to inform the local plan. And I think the same applies on heritage. I don't know if Simon wants to comment further on heritage, because that's more his ball than mine, but hope that helps reassure you somewhat.
Simon, I'll bring you in and then I'll ask Karen to conclude comments. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Cox raised a question around the status of this design guide. Its status is purely as guidance, it's not an adopted document. Part of the problem with that is it's a living document, it's constantly updated, so it's quite complex to actually formalise that in terms of adopting something which is a bit like a moving target. In terms of heritage assets and the review and mechanisms for their protection, the degree of weight to be given to heritage assets is clearly set out in statute and the MPPF with regard to non-designated assets. We have a very advanced and very sophisticated mechanism here at City Council for assessing non-designated heritage assets and adding them to a local list. That's received a lot of support at Peel. So that should give you some hope that even assets which are hitherto unknown, as they become apparent and their significance becomes known, we can obviously afford them appropriate and proportionate weight in decision making. And the current local plan policy around heritage does embrace the whole concept of non-designated heritage assets and the local list. So that's already very well embedded in our policy framework. Having regard to the particular matters around the case you referred to, obviously there is an SPD there already adopted, and that cuts both ways, because where we set out, if you like, a shopping list of things to be achieved, we can't take away from that list, but equally in the course of consideration, it's difficult to add to that shopping list, because that's been through full public consultation to get it to the full weight assigned to SPD status. Obviously, as things emerge and become apparent through the mechanism I've already described, we can ensure that appropriate weight is given, and should something become subject to statutory designation, then the full weight of the statute would be applicable to those assets. If that makes sense. Thank you.
That's very clear. Karen, anything to add? No, Simon did cover it. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Councillor Kirkby Taylor, who just about got away with not being sent a demand from the mayor for his phone going off, but I'll let you off. Richard, please have your say.
Thank you. It was only a ping, it didn't actually ring.
Pings and rings were very...
It's close, I'm not sure. Yes, sorry, I just wanted to start off by saying that most statutory legislation is a minimum floor. It's not actually best practice. We don't know where legislation is going to be going, but it's only ever going to go up. We're only ever going to get stronger controls. So the fact that some of our central government bits of legislation have been pushed back, it's not going to affect us at all. We have to assume that it's going to be there, or something stronger is going to be there. It's a minimum floor, it's not best practice. With regards to the actual plan, I love the idea of creating a better environment central to our approach. It's where we've got to be, and while I've got full trust in our officers, we've got to recognise there is a habit of developers to dodge targets and misuse data. So we're going to have to make sure that whatever we put forward, we're not just trusting in the spirit of it. We've got to be extremely robust with the language and the letter of the plan that we're putting forward. On which note, on a completely functional level, can we confirm that by the time this local plan is actually starting to have any real effect, it's going to be very close to 2030, when we should be either at carbon zero or very, very close to carbon zero? On that front, we need to be bearing that in mind all the way through this process. It's not just that we can be bold here, it's that we've got to be bold if we're actually going to get where we need to be carbon zero at 2030. With the issues and options, I also wanted to raise the climate change SPD. We mentioned that we're wanting to make sure that we don't contradict it and that we make sure that the current SPD is implemented. As I understand it, the SPD, and by extension Letty's inclusion in it, couldn't put additional burdens onto the developers when it was written. As we are now rewriting the local plan, we can place those additional burdens on the developers. This is when we need to actually step it up. We need to not just confirm what we've already said, we need to move forward and push for something better. The next point I wanted to make was the design code. You're going to be consulting with relevant professionals and interested groups. Is the local plan committee going to be included on that? Because it seems like something we should be included in, and we can provide backing that would allow the officers to push for something that's well beyond what would otherwise be practicable. I don't know, that's something for discussion later, perhaps, but I think it is something that would be worth bearing in mind and coming back to a later date. Similarly for community and social infrastructure. And the final thing I wanted to say was, has anybody reached out to ACAN, the Architect Climate Action Network? They've got a body of resources, and I know for a fact they've got local plan and master planning specialists amongst their number, and they could be a very, very useful group for officers to reach out to for advice and information. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. A number of points there, and I want to make sure that the point was picked up that Councillor Smith raised earlier about health and wellbeing professionals and health and wellbeing users. Might be a Health Watch Essex or something like that, who may be the right people to go through. Right, number of points again. Sandra, do you want to kick off?
Thank you very much. Yeah, but I think I would just say that all these are really useful comments, and we're listening and taking away. And I think in terms of the discussion on each of the other themes, it's not intended to be exhaustive, and it's just giving a bit of a flavour of what's to come. So when we get to health and wellbeing engagement, for example, we would intend to expand considerably on what that it involves. But you know, all this is really, really useful because we can be ahead of the game and take the actions away. And the same goes for the references that Councillor Kirkby-Taylor's just made as well, in following that up in engagement. So I think just in terms of the climate change, and obviously the local plan presents us with a different opportunity to supplementary planning document, which can only take things within the context of the adopted policy. The local plan review will be evidence-based and respond to what is appropriate for the time period we're planning for, and be able to put things in policy in a way that could be new policy and different, that can follow forward a step further than the SPD currently can. So I think we can assure you on that point that all of that will, the opportunities there to be bold, as you put it, and take things further. And I think the other point I made a note of is making sure we include local plan committee as consultee. I think it's a given that local plan committee, as a decision making each step along the way, will have the opportunity, probably not necessarily only through the formal committee itself, but to feed into, engage in all of these things along the way, and obviously have the final say in before we consult on any of the detail for the design code and other themes when we get to them. That's all the points I made a note of. I think I've covered everything.
I think that's hopefully covered everything. We've just on the point of the local plan committee, as I've just been reminded, we've got to be careful about predetermination, but we will check on that and let people know. But we will get regular reports anyway as local plan committee, so you can bet your life that we will be fully involved in the development of this. Next is Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, as a substitute, there's many discussions that have gone prior to this that I've not been involved with. However, there are a number of points that occurred to me while listening to previous speakers. First of all, I want to pay tribute to the residents who work many hours tirelessly producing neighbourhood plans. We've heard from the Great Tay member in Have Your Say, and I know that Braeswick residents are similarly diligent. Braeswick Residents Association also considers that the Myland neighbourhood plan has been overridden by the local plan. It was an exhaustive process to produce the neighbourhood plan that was signed off by the inspectors. And I don't think it's any understatement to say they were absolutely livid to find that it had very little impact. So the question that arises from that is, officers spoke about the full weight being given to neighbourhood plans. My question is, what weight is actually given to neighbourhood plans in the calculation? We've also heard reference to tendering and North East Herts successfully challenging high OANs. So my request and expectation is that officers will liaise, reflect, and incorporate the learnings from those authorities that have successfully taken on board genuine, heartfelt concerns about the capacity of the area to absorb unsustainably high numbers of new developments, new homes. So when I've spoke at planning committees before, I've always said it's very wrong to consider our residents as some sort of negative force against progress. They really aren't. Many of the residents' associations that I deal with and speak to, and the people who spend their time freely working away on these neighbourhood plans, are really thinking very hard about the people who will be part of their associations in the years to come. And they feel very wronged that they're often positioned as being obstructive when they're quite the reverse. Their motivation is to drive quality. And quality isn't just about who gets a fake chimney and who gets a stone windowsill. When we talk about design and quality, we're thinking about avoiding situations where the need to cram 70 houses behind Braeswick, Upper Braeswick as it stands, means that we have a ridiculous situation where the planning committee felt it had no option but to pass a plan where there was a playground is now going to abut a 19-foot drop. Now, we need common sense to prevail here. And we are not saying that we're against house building. Quite the opposite. What we're for is happy residents, both the ones who live there now and the ones yet to come. It is a weighty thing to do, and we must consider these things carefully and not simply dismiss residents' concerns as somebody who's pulling the ladder up. That's not it at all in my experience. So the other point I just wanted to raise, I wasn't clear. So I have a great deal of sympathy for the position that we ought to know what the infrastructure can cope with before we start talking about how many more homes it can support and what we might need to do that. And I'm very, very concerned at the idea, I may have picked this up wrong, that some sort of concurrence should go on, because we've already noted the exhausting demand on residents to try and keep up with the amount of consultation they're expected to engage with meaningfully. It really is not fair on the residents to expect them to give up all of their free time outside of their own working lives and their own family lives to endlessly consult in some sort of almost crazy plate spinning exercise. Those are the points I wanted to share.
Karen.
Thank you. I'm not sure if Councillor Naylor's aware, but Myland Neighbourhood Plan has just been reviewed. Yes. Oh, so if there was any concerns about the original neighbourhood plan, they had the opportunity to address them in that neighbourhood plan review. So I'm not sure what there is outstanding there. We've always worked well with the Community Council, so I'm a bit surprised to hear what you had to say there. I think I'd also like to clarify the point about tendering District Council. Sandra mentioned earlier, they haven't successfully challenged their housing target. They haven't done any work on the housing target. They're about to commence that piece of work, as we are. Their last housing target was affected by something termed unattributable population change, which may have affected the outcome, and is quite a rare instance. But since then, we've had the results of the 2021 census, so they should be have a more robust evidence base in order to inform their housing targets going forward. And then infrastructure and consultation, we did agree at the last committee about how we would consult on this. You know, it is almost an ongoing basis, but people can dip in and dip out in terms of those areas that they're most interested or affected by. I'm not sure if you're saying you don't want us to consult, or that we should do it the old way, i.e. all in one draft plan, which I think, you know, members have moved away from, really, but perhaps you can clarify that for us in case I've misunderstood.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. No, I think I'm merely referring to that's what I was trying to understand, if there was an expectation that they would look at things concurrently. That seemed to me what was being suggested earlier, perhaps not. But they really do, feel very exhausted by the constant demands of consultation and the idea that they might dip in and out of the bits they're interested in. I think it's fair to say the people that I speak to in my ward are interested in all of it, and wouldn't want to have to make artificial priorities regards one or the other in order to manage the amount of consulting that they would like to be involved in. I think it's all important to them.
I think that's just a comment that has to lay there, but it's a reasonable comment, it's a valid comment, and we'll take it on board, and it's been minuted by Rob. But there are a number of ways we could go about progressing the local plan, and it's up to this committee to decide how we do it. But thank you for your comments, Councillor Naylor. Before I bring Councillor Barber and Councillor Sykes back in for their second go, and we've got a few minutes before the break, I just wanted to ask a very short question about if we do take this approach forward, blue and green infrastructure, can you give examples of other local authorities who are, because this would be a new thing for us, are there other local authorities who are going down this route as well? And if so, which?
Not that we're aware of, no. I think we have had some conversations with Planning Advisory Service, who are very interested in looking at different ways of carrying out local plans, particularly with the pressure to try and speed things up and do things perhaps differently and better. If there are others who are sort of at the same stage as us and what like-minded, then through our contacts at Planning Advisory Service, I think we'll have the opportunity to connect. That's not to say there aren't others that are doing it, but in terms of at this stage for early on in a local plan review, other than through the engagement with them, I'm not aware of any other authorities at this stage, no.
Thank you. I don't mind Colchester being at the leading edge. Councillor Smalls, just to clarify, because I've got Councillor Barber and Councillor Sykes to come in, but I'll let you in first because you haven't spoken yet, and then I'll bring them back in.
It's quite a quick question, and I'm a substitute as well, but I've been following a bit of this. This is to clarify, and the people who are here regularly will probably know. So the blue and green, the blue and green are like the rivers and the green passageways. I'm really keen on that. I think that's really good. But are we saying that's going to be the priority? Because I'm also really conscious of the need for housing. Councillor Smith was talking about the number of families we've got in temporary housing, and obviously that has to be a priority as well. So how are the priorities ordered?
Thank you. Sandra?
I think what we're saying is that's the starting point, that we start from having a good understanding about that and how that everything's linked together and everything's a priority, and the local plan needs to achieve all of the objectives, but you need to start from somewhere. And I think historically most local plans, and I think it's probably fair to say that the approach that was taken previously, is that we tend to start with housing numbers and thinking, that way out. I think the suggestion of this approach is that we start with building a better picture and understanding of the opportunities to create a better environment through the evidence base on the green network and waterways, and take it from there as a start. Not to say that that's the most important, but that's just the approach to start the thinking for informing the objectives for the whole plan.
Thank you, Councillor Smalls. Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. I guess in my own head, summarising where we are with our policy and what you're actually asking for us to vote on, I suppose, this evening, just so I can clarify in my head, even though I've got to go soon, I probably will miss the vote. But I can state my position nonetheless. I think what I can understand is we need to review the plan. We don't have a choice in that. So legally, we're required to review the plans. That's in disputes. We have to do that. You're asking us in this particular item to say, well, if we're reviewing it, what are the priorities you would like us to start with when looking at the spatial strategy? What sort of items do we want you to focus on? So we're talking about here the environment, broadly speaking, as a primary aim here. In the second agenda item, we're going to the call for the second one after this. We're going for the call for sites, which I think there has been a bit of a blurring inevitably in this item agenda between the two issues. What we're not voting on this evening, just for clarity, is putting forward any form of agreement to how we're going to possibly agree housing numbers in the future. That's not open for discussion. We can test you effectively on our logic behind the standard formula as a starting point, and perhaps, as you mentioned, Karen, any variations beyond that we could hope to argue. So we're going to have the opportunity to do that later down the line, just to reassure members. Good, because I think from that basis, in fact, we have to review it. I don't think we can really dispute it at this stage. The call for sites doesn't tie us into any agreement on housing numbers. So I feel much more reassured in that respect for us going forward with that approach. Just picking up on a couple of points members have raised, I'm not sure we can assume that actually central government controls will get any stronger on various parts of policies. I have no restriction in saying this because I put a comment on social media. The government's announcement on issues to do with travel, for example, recently will have an impact on air quality inevitably. So I don't think we can say that actually what government does will lead to stronger protections for the environment. So I think that's a dangerous assumption. So we should be doing everything we can locally to act as a buffer against changes to national government, whatever party that may be. So I can't support that sentiment because I think it risks us being a bit lethargic on some of the safeguards we want to put in at a local level, just by assuming some hypothetical government in the future will just protect the environment. So I don't think we can rely on that. Is the points I want to make.
Yeah, I think there were points rather than questions. And
Sorry,
I think
I just want. But you were nodding.
Genuine agreement all round from everybody, I think.
So my understanding is fine.
Thank
So
you.
I support all the.
Absolutely. Before we move to the break, Councillor Sunnox, are you going to be brief-ish?
I've got the message, Chair. I'd like to echo Councillor Small's sort of question about whether blue and green infrastructure really is the right place to start. I mean, we've got serious stuff here on the infrastructure side. We've got serious stuff on the housing side. I know that it sounds good and popular, but there's actually serious work to do, and we need that infrastructure audit. Would be my feedback to be incorporated somehow. I'm persuaded on the need for an early start to the plan. I'd love, when we come to the item later, I'll be saying I'd love to see plans done in 30 months and much more punchy activity. But I'm persuaded that given where we are now, we have to do that. I'm delighted that we're going to be looking at a cell with Essex County Council. And we wrote all those consultation responses. I got it written, the same response written by 3 people, went off to Essex County Council. We never heard anything back, but it sounds as if you might have heard something back. And so that is really good news. And I'll be following that piece of work closely as the news floats through. I'm also pleased that you're going to be using the infrastructure constraints to look at the OAN. Or the standard methodology, because I think there's plenty of room to look at that if there are good reasons. We should be able to do a lower figure. And in terms of Councillor Smith saying he wants a higher figure because we've got 315 families. Sorry.
I did not say that. I said we needed more social housing. I think we might look at the ratio.
Yeah,
would be where I would go for.
I think that's clarified it.
Okay. Thank you. We need more social housing, but we ought to be looking at the 70,000 odd housing stock that we've got now to solve that problem, not trying to build our way out of it. And I accept that that wasn't what you were saying, but I think it's still a valid point. We mustn't get into this thought process that we've got a problem with 315 families and that therefore we have to build more and more and more. We need to solve that problem, I feel, with the existing housing stock. Those are my points. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sonics. Anybody wish to respond to those points? Word taken on board? Thank you. Before we move to the vote, I noticed the portfolio holder has joined us in the room. And there was a question, I don't know, I can't force you to join us at the table, Councillor Luxford-Vaughan, but the statement that was given in your name before the meeting, it was asked by Councillor Cox, I think. Was that a personal statement or was that a collective statement on the behalf of the Cabinet? If you could clarify that, that would be very helpful for our committee.
It's a statement by me as the portfolio holder. I think there's been a confusion. I'm not at all opposed to having a review of the local plan, and that is what is the Cabinet's position as well. I think what has come to light for me too late is the focus of that, and that's where my statement was directed, that I think the focus is slightly off kilter. Although it's an important issue, I don't think it should be the number one priority. So the Cabinet definitely agrees with the review. I personally definitely agree with the review. That's not what that statement was about. So it's not a personal view.
Statement as portfolio holder. Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful clarification. Right, I'm going to move to the vote. The recommendation is members are asked to agree the approach to local plan review of using the green network and waterways and the creating a better environment agenda as the starting point and key purpose of the local plan review. Can I see all those in favour, please show. Anybody against? Any abstentions? 2 abstentions. Thank you very much. We will take a 15-minute break, so if we can be back in the room at around 10 to 8, please. with item 8 once you're back in position. Are we, Councillor Barber's had to go, so up and recording, Rob? Up and record. Richard is giving me the wave to say we are. So item 8, already been referred to tangentially. Colchester Local Plan Review, call for sites and strategic land availability assessment, otherwise known, Councillor Smalls for your benefit, otherwise known as the SLAR, which is a dreadful acronym, the Strategic Land Availability Assessment. If you hear SLAR, that is what it is. Okay, and I'll get my computer going again. This is Beth. Please, to introduce.
Thank you. So the call for sites is an opportunity for land to be promoted for development across the city. Given the environment-led approach to local plan review, this also includes the ability for sites to be promoted for green infrastructure. The sites received through the call for sites, plus any additional sites identified by a desktop study, will be assessed through the Strategic Land Availability Assessment. It's because it's a mouthful, that's why we shorten it, known as SLAR. This sets out how sites will be appraised for their suitability, availability and achievability, with the aim of objectively determining which sites could be delivered over the plan period. Neither the call for sites nor the SLAR identify site allocations. Both enable an understanding of the development potential across the city, and alongside a number of additional evidence-based documents will inform the overall spatial strategy, including allocations for the local plan. The call for sites and SLAR methodology doesn't tie us into any agreement on housing numbers. The SLAR methodology has been prepared in accordance with the planning practice guidance and is a technical assessment. The call for sites pro forma and SLAR methodology are provided in full as an appendix to the report. It is proposed to launch both at the same time to provide a more holistic understanding of the site assessment process for the local plan review. Although the methodology isn't required to be consulted upon, it's considered best practice to do so. As part of the consultation, there will also be an officer workshop with colleagues from across the Planning Service and Essex County Council. Members are asked to agree to launch the call for sites, agree to publish the SLAR methodology for public consultation, and to agree that minor changes can be made by the joint heads of planning in consultation with the chair of the committee prior to the consultation commencing. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. That's very clear. We've had some discussion on this already, so let's try not to repeat ourselves, but this is, again, is an important matter that this committee has to make a decision on. Who can I see who wants to speak on this? Councillor Luxon-Vaughan, you've asked to the table. I think it would be helpful for you to make some comments before we have our deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you. Most of what we've outlined in the section at the bottom, you just mentioned what his name was, seemed all quite reasonable, but it's very much a broad brush approach where I'm sort of concerned that it might be a little advanced of actually getting the consultation feedback back and developing what our strategy is. So, you know, I have a slight question as to whether it's a little premature and whether it needs to be more tailored to the strategy that we produce a bit later on. However, you know, that's a comment rather than a forceful position. The other thing is that we do have a significant buffer within our existing local plan. I think it was 13%, identified as 13%. But as we've already established, some of those sites may not come forward. So as part of the review process, are we going to be looking at the viability of the existing sites just to check what the shortfall may be, and also if there is a question of whether the numbers are going to go up to allocate additional sites to cope with that additional demand. There's a suggestion, there's a lot of criteria in the data source, the desktop thing, but one of the things that I thought was really relevant when we were producing a neighbourhood plan was that we specified a maximum distance from a train station or a significant bus route. As I said earlier about infrastructure and transport, a specification or at least a guideline would be quite useful. Otherwise, we're going to get sites that are in the middle of nowhere and there's no way to connect them back, and that's going to create issues later on. So from that table 1, it says the area of search for brownfield sites is limited to the existing brownfield register. Can this be reviewed? Is one question. It seems a bit contradictory that if the theme for the review is existing green spaces, then it also says that possible locations for development sites in rural locations would be existing green spaces. So that puts the emphasis on anybody from a rural location to actually say that they don't want those to be considered. I just think that's a contradiction in what we're talking about, because if the first part of the plan is to establish open spaces and waterways that are important to the communities, and communities are the best people to identify those, then to suggest they might actually be used as sites seems a bit weird, to be honest. It does mention flood zones, and there's a stipulation of if 50%, I can't remember exactly the detail, but I think if something's in a flood zone, it shouldn't be considered. It also says that areas of outstanding natural beauty, sites that have a percentage of them rather than the whole of them within an area of outstanding natural beauty, sites of special scientific interest, special areas of conservation, special protection areas, scheduled ancient monuments and ancient woodlands could be considered. I think if they've got any part of the site that overlaps those, they shouldn't be considered. And then you'll get different sites coming forward that already exclude them. And I think also we need to consider a buffer zone around them, because once you get English heritage involved, for instance, there'll be things like sort of sight lines and preserved landscapes and views and stuff. So I think that needs tightening up. Also, it says the criteria going forward is dismiss the development on agricultural land with grade 1 or 2 classifications and sites with minerals safeguarding, specified as minerals safeguarding areas. Obviously, we have 2,500 homes in this local plan that are part of the garden community. Is that condition then going to be put forward for our next local plan, or the change to this one? Because at that point, obviously, that is not only grade 1 agricultural land, but it's also mineral safeguarding area. So either the criteria has to change, or we have to review whether that site can be used. And then the last thing, and it follows on from points other people have made about one of the questions is there evidence that it would not be possible to deliver necessary utilities? Myself, Karen, and the leader went to see Anglian Water. They were talking about how regulations will impact on what they can and can't do in terms of extraction of groundwater, for instance. It's a lot more complicated than we have time to go into today, but basically looks very scary that there will be an enormous shortfall in years to come unless they do something quite radical. Should that not feed into, given we don't have a resolution to that, should that not be used as a restriction in terms of arguing the case that our numbers shouldn't go up? I mean, that's one example of where I think we're constrained, and we should make a strong case that our numbers wouldn't be going up.
Thank you. Give you a fairly long crack at that. Beth, do you want to address some of those points, please?
Yep, that's fine. I'll make a start, but there might be a few things that I haven't got the answer to, so Karen might want to pick up. I think, as we've heard from the debate already this evening, that the need for the local plan review to commence has been outlined, and we know the dates that we need to work to. The call for sites and SHLA is one part of that overall picture. It's about gaining an understanding of the development potential across the city. It's not to make the decisions on the spatial strategy or the allocations, but we do need to start these pieces of work because they do take a significant amount of time. The committee report outlines that there'll be another report brought to local planning committee after we've done the consultation on the SHLA methodology, to obviously consider those responses, make any changes that we need to make to the methodology. The earliest that can happen is obviously December, so we wouldn't be looking to even start any assessments until the new year. So that's also part of the reason why we need to consider these things early. The point about site allocations in the existing local plan, yes, any site allocations in the local plan that haven't already been brought forward will be looked at again through the SHLA methodology, and I think that was outlined at committee last time round. The point about maximum distances from key services and infrastructure and things like that, and we've taken the approach to just include one criteria on this time round because we think that it's more suitable to look at infrastructure and services on a settlement scale as opposed to the individual sites. So we're proposing to look at that through the settlement boundary review. So the first stage of that would provide an overview of the existing settlement and what facilities are within the settlement. The point about the brownfield register, that is updated annually anyway, so obviously whatever sites are on that at that point in time we will consider. Open and green spaces, the table 1 in the report about sources of information for the desktop study, that's taken from the PPG, so that's not something that
PPG?
Oh, sorry, planning practice guidance. It's natural, we get used to them, don't we?
I know, with substitute members on the committee, yes, we need to be careful with acronyms.
So yes, that is taken from the National Planning Practice Guidance. And some of the other points around being within a flood zone and wholly within an area of outstanding national beauty and other designations, there are criteria in the initial survey that if the site gets a red, they will fall away from that assessment, they won't continue through the process. But in the second stage of the assessment, there are additional questions about those, so it's not necessarily just included once. So things like flooding, those national designations are looked at more than once through the assessment. And then a final point just around if a site was to get a red for any single criteria, that doesn't necessarily mean that it would get a red rating overall. So there's lots of criteria in the methodology and they need to be considered in the round before any overall decision is made about that site. And if I've missed anything, hopefully others can pick it up.
Very comprehensive, Beth, thank you. I think that covered everything, well done. Okay, members of the committee, I'm sure you've got points to make. Councillor Smith, I know you want to kick off, please.
Thank you. 2 observations, if I may. The first is, bearing in mind the history last time, we had a call for sites, and then a certain site called Middlewick managed to appear after most of the process had been gone through. Presumably, there's nothing that prevents someone coming along further on in the process and saying, actually, I've just had a great idea, this site should be added, and it then would be assessed along with all the others. So that would still be the case. I'm seeing lots of knowledge. There's nothing we can do to prevent that or, okay, right, I tried. Second one is on 331 in the section on suitability. We're using only a single criteria to be included in relation to infrastructure and key services. Given the emphasis we're putting on infrastructure, is it right that we only have one test for that, rather than a test that says, is it okay for doctor surgeries? Is it okay for education? Is it okay for this, that, and the other? Because it strikes me that you might have a site that has one failing and would come up, or you have another site which fails in all those categories and is therefore significantly worse. But we've only put it into one category, so therefore it would only get one red, wouldn't it? So I wonder whether we're missing a trick there. So I'm questioning that bit of the mythology, whether we should actually have more than one criteria in there.
And before you answer, Beth, I remember Councillor Luxembourne did mention, and you may have mentioned it, how close you are to a railway station or bus hubs. Yeah, so good points, Councillor Smith. Beth?
Yep. So I think we've taken that approach because we want to try to learn on what didn't work well in the SCHLAR methodology previously, and there can be sort of differences in how distances are measured. So you could go as the crow flies, but that doesn't actually give you something that's worthwhile, because someone then can't walk that way. There might be a road that they've got to cross. So looking at distances is really quite difficult. So that's why we have proposed something slightly different this time. And we have also included in the settlement boundary review, what we're proposing to do through that is to look at the infrastructure and facilities on a settlement level scale as opposed to individual sites. So it will be looked at through the local plan review, not necessarily on a site individual basis, but it is something that we do want to discuss at the officer workshop, particularly with our colleagues in Essex County Council, because they have they're obviously involved in local plans across Essex. They have examples of what has worked well in other places, so wanting to build on some of those lessons learned from others as well. And this is all things that we would want to hear in consultation responses as well. If we've got things wrong or there's something that we need to think about again and people have got suggestions, then put that in your responses and we can amend the methodology accordingly.
Railway stations and bus services, that'll be included in. Yeah. Councillor Smith, I will let you come back briefly.
Thank you, yes. I'm struggling a little bit though with a settlement boundary. How does that work with respect to an urban area? I understand how you can say to a village, it hasn't got a doctor's surgery, what have you. But if I'm sticking a large development onto Colchester, you know, is someone going to say, great, yes, there's a doctor's surgery over in Lexden, but I'm actually going to be developing over in Mile End or what have you? So could you explain that to me?
Yeah, I will give it a go, and if others want to add, please do. So I think the way that we've done it previously for Colchester is it's sort of divided up into north, south, east, west, to look at those to look at Colchester, not just within one whole picture, because as you say, it's quite difficult, the settlement boundary going all the way round doesn't make sense. So we do divide it in between those sort of four broad areas. I don't know if anyone wants to add more.
Is that clear?
It's clear, but I think that's something that members might like to be a little bit involved in, because just as with Councillor Vaughan's comment about distance, if you do a straight distance to a train station, I'd probably find that people in Rowhedge would be to be served by the Wivenhoe railway station. Yes. Which clearly will be logical, and there are issues within the urban area as well, where some areas are easier to move between than others. So I think we might need to look at that rather carefully. So,
thank you. Yeah, good point. Must be, I do prefer railway station to the term train station. It's very American. Railway station as well. I'm getting very old-fashioned in my old age, aren't I? Right, okay. Anybody else wish to? Councillor Naylor, you saw first, then Councillor Sunnox and Councillor Kirkby-Taylor, in that order, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just reflecting on the points that were just made, it is encouraging to me that there's reflection. I think that's always to be welcomed. However, there's another piece to that, which is whenever you propose something new in order to take account of a learning, there will be potentially unintended consequences of one example we've just heard there of what might happen. And I think from my point of view, I want some more work, some more tests to be put into the degree to which there is a rigour to this, and there has been some sensible and deep reflection about unintended consequences and some discussion around that. And I think this is the sentiment that I'm starting to hear from other councillors, other members. There's a concern about that.
Beth?
Yeah, so I think the first point I'd say is that the methodology that we have developed has been prepared in accordance with the planning practice guidance. So it's not like we're completely starting from scratch. So we do have some guidelines of what the methodology can and can't do. We are just trying to also factor in learning from what we know hasn't worked before. But yeah, that's potentially something that we do want to try to explore through that workshop that I mentioned earlier, is having a sounding board to see, are there any is there anything that we haven't thought of as a result of some of these proposals, wanting to talk it through with other officers that deal with this on a day-to-day basis, that hopefully we avoid any issues cropping up. But yeah, certainly we will consider all of those points.
Yes, Councillor Naylor?
Thank you, that's helpful. I would just also like to echo that I think as a member, councillors would want to further look at that and be involved in that, rather than, though I'm sure you will do good work there, I certainly would feel it was something that we ought to look at further and test further.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, after the consultation, the methodology will come back to local plan committee for endorsement adoption. So members will have an opportunity to see how the methodology has been revised as well. So there will be, and obviously you can respond to the consultation as well. So there are plenty of opportunities for members to still be involved as well.
Remember that there's a lot of experience from our officers around these issues. I'm not going to embarrass them by asking how many calls for sites they may have got through in their careers. I think it's a fair few, and they learn from the experience every time, and we try and improve it every time. So that's what we're trying to do here. But points are well made and well taken. Councillor Kirkby-Taylor, please.
Thank you. I'd like to know just how much flexibility we have in the methodology, specifically in pushing for areas to be declared biodiversity net gain off-site sites. I think we all know where I'm referring to. Are we entirely reliant on the landowner proposing it, or can, as appears to be suggested in the form, any relevant community group make the suggestion and it will be treated with the same regard as if it was the landowner? It would be brilliant. Leading on from that, where a site is put forward for a particular use, can we suggest a different usage? So if we have lots and lots of residential suggestions being put forward, can we suggest actually we need a school there, and say we need some of you to go over to infrastructure, and then either ask for them to develop it, or can we simply say that one is in the best to put a school in, we're going to put a school, we're going to want to put a school there? How much leeway do we have with that? And I think there needs to be a clarification of the near future on the assessment criterions for where there's a strong likelihood of planning application being submitted in the near future. We need to make sure we're being absolutely crystal clear how we're coming to that conclusion, so that we can avoid.
I think made a very good observation that when you say you know where I'm referring to, members of the public might not. So if you want to clarify.
Absolutely. Just to clarify, I was referring to the Middlewick Ranges there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, Beth, do you want to answer some of those? Oh, Karen.
I'm just going to do it as I nodded, and I just wanted to caveat. Richard took my nod to mean, yes, anyone can put forward sites and they'll be treated exactly the same. I guess what I should caveat that with is that we'll need to ensure, if someone else puts a site forward, that we're sure it's deliverable, developable, viable, all those things. But, you know, there's no reason we can't look at sites ourselves as well and identify those to go through the process if we think something is suitable. I guess in terms of alternative land uses, it becomes more tricky unless you've got a big site or a number of sites, and you can work together to look at where those uses might be most beneficial and appropriate. But, you know, there's different land uses which have different values, of course, so that all has to come into play.
Beth, did you want to add anything? But I'm going to pin you down. Richard asked you to define the near future. What does that mean?
Yeah, I guess perhaps it's easier when we are more aware of sites or have longer to prepare, but there's things like the Five Ways Fruit Farm site in Stanway that still hasn't delivered any housing numbers, but we knew that was going to be later in the plan period because of mineral extraction. So there's some things we have more certainty over than others. But yeah, we can certainly try and pin it down as much as possible.
That would be very helpful, thank you. Councillor Sykes. Oh, yeah, of course you can.
Sorry, I just wanted to come back and say, I think that my point with the near future was as much that we have to be clear that we have disregarded something or not on that grounds, and actually be able to evidence it clearly to avoid ourselves being subject to accusations of mispractice or whatever.
Thank you, that's cleared that, thank you. William.
Yes, three things. First of all, small sites. There's a cut-off, and I understand why there's a cut-off at 5 acres, or five dwellings, isn't it? I understand why, just administratively, you do that. But there's a real danger. We've got a problem with small house builders are not getting their place in the sun. The big house builders are beginning to dominate, and there's all sorts of reports about it. So we just ought to give a little thought about how we can encourage the micro sites to come forward, and the ones and the twos and the self builds. I think if it doesn't go into an allocation in the plan, people will feel they've got no hope and it's not even worth trying for their site. So we need to put some words in, or somehow communicate that organic, small level growth, small house builders are encouraged in some way. And the second thing I wanted to say is, when we looked at this before, we found that the brownfield register, particularly in the countryside, was just way off. There were so many brownfield sites sitting there that weren't on our register. So I'm not quite sure how we can deal with that. And I remember Karen saying, oh, well, if you know of some sites, put them forward, but that's a big job to do. So there's a lot of, there is brownfield stuff out there. And the third is that I know that agricultural farmyards are not treated as brownfield by law, but I think there is a move afoot, and you will know exactly whether it's in the levelling up bill or where it is, but I think there's a move afoot to include them. So should we include some of those in our call for sites? They are real blots on the landscape. A lot of them have run-down, asbestos-ridden buildings, pig manure all over the place. You know, the world's a better place if they can be cleaned up and developed. And the argument that they're not sustainable because they're in the middle of the countryside doesn't, to me, hold water when they've been there often for hundreds of years. So three things: the small sites, the brownfield sites, and the agricultural sites.
Thanks, William. Very clear. Beth?
I'm going to take 1 and 2 and defer 3 further down the table. So the site thresholds, we have taken them from the planning practice guidance. So that particular element sets out that if the local authority wants to take a different approach to what is set out in the planning practice guidance, that we need to justify that. So we didn't feel that there was a reason to do something different than what is already in the guidance. So that's why we've gone with the 5 or more dwellings threshold. The point about other brownfield sites, in the table we've also, for some of the other types of sites, included discussions with internal stakeholders, including elected members. So that could be another way, for particularly for brownfield sites. It doesn't just have to be from the Brownfield Land Register. So if there are any that you know of in your wards, then do let us know, and you can obviously encourage landowners to submit their those sites through the call for sites process as well, so that they're thrown into the pot for consideration.
Karen, do you want to add?
I think the only thing would be to say that agricultural holdings do, of course, benefit from some permitted development. So, you know, although they're often outside of settlement boundaries, they do benefit from being allowed to convert in some instances.
Do you want to come back, William?
Yes, my question wasn't more, I wasn't questioning your administrative decision to put that in, not questioning that at all, I understand it. Can we put anything in to make it clear that proposals for, that at some point in the process, that we love small house builders, show them some love, and also to show that in this call for sites, we're encouraging brownfield?
Yeah, I think that's taken on board. We love good small house builders. That's the point. I think certainly, I think the government and the opposition have said they want to look at redesignating what green belt actually means, because you're right, some of it is agricultural land that none of us would recognise. Some of it's scrub land, and yes, we've got to find places to build, and they've got to be appropriate. But I think that's being taken on board. I think the political parties are wising up to that. Any other points, Richard?
Just, I did notice that there is a specific note in there saying that we can include an allocation for windfall sites. Would that cover the small developers that Councillor Sonnets is talking about? So we could almost use that to bundle them in together.
Lots of nods.
To a certain extent, yes. But I think you're probably talking about maybe small sites on the edge of settlements which are excluded from this process, so never get given really sort of any consideration. Is that the sort of thing which,
yes, that and subdivision. Subdivision could be a major source. There's lots of rural north. There's, I know I'm going to be mocked, but there's lots of coach houses and quite big plots, and people want to do we encourage that? Do we discourage that? They'll get the message from this that it's just not even on the agenda, and it will give us housing and small housing in rural areas where it's needed.
Perhaps that's more a policy approach rather than actually inviting sites forward like that. It's how we word the policies to be perhaps a bit more flexible.
I think Councillor Smith, I and a number of other members would look at any opportunity to create more housing, especially if it's already in existing buildings, So I think we've got to take a policy approach to that, and I think officers understand that. Any other contributions? Councillor Cox.
Very quickly, I'm just looking at Google Scholar on schlar, my new word of the week, and seeing what's been written.
I don't know why it's schlar and not slar.
that thing. It's been a fair bit written by academics on planning and housing specialists on that methodology. Is this something that you guys have looked at, you've got access to? Is there systematic review of these methodologies to see what good looks like? And I'd be happy to pass any of this on. I mean, I don't know about any of it, but I'd be happy to forward it to you.
Are you aware of that?
I have to say no, but by all means forward it along.
Okay.
I think the planning practice guidance tends to be the starting point as it is national guidance. So we obviously are very familiar with what that says, and that has been updated since we did the last call for sites and SHLA. So that's part of the reason why the assessment is different to what we had last time, because national guidance has changed. So that has sort of taken up some of those learnings from what's worked previously and what hasn't, sort of through that national level as well.
And just to clear up, it's SHLA because the word housing used to be in there, did it? So it's strategic housing, but now it's okay, but we've kept the acronym up. Okay, let's move to the recommendation, shall we? Right, the recommendations there are three. One, agree to launch the call for sites with all the caveats that you've heard tonight about that. Two, agree to publish the strategic land availability assessment for public consultation in accordance with Planning Act regulations and the statement of community involvement. And three, agree that minor changes to the call for sites pro forma and strategic land availability assessment methodology can be approved by the joint heads of planning in consultation with the chair of the committee prior to the consultation commencing. I will add the chair of the committee and group spokespersons. We can add that to the recommendation, please. All those in favour, please show. I think that was, keep your hand up. That's unanimous, isn't it?
That is unanimous, Chair.
Unanimous. Well, you voted and then you... I won't say anything to Councillor Smith, but thank you for your vote and your clarification on the vote. Thanks very much. We're on to our final item of the night, which is item 9, consultation on implementation of plan making reforms. Beth, I'll bring you in a minute to introduce the item. I did criticise Councillor Luxford-Vaughan earlier about the lateness of her statement on an earlier item. She has provided, I think last week, a draft of what, and I think it is the portfolio holder and the cabinet who do the response. We cannot. This is for us just to advise and guide. So thank you for that, Councillor Luxford-Vaughan. That was very helpful that you have input into a draft of the responses. So I don't know if that went to every member of the committee. Yeah, I think, did you all get that? It did, so you all got that. I was trying to find the email. Yeah, subs may not have got that, sorry. But Beth, I'm sure you'll encapsulate that into some of your remarks in your introduction, please.
Thank you. So, the Government Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities launched a consultation in July on the implementation of plan making reforms. This builds upon the proposals within the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill introduced to Parliament in May 2022. The report summarises the content of the consultation document and is intended to stimulate discussion to help inform the Council's response to the consultation. A response to the consultation is being drafted and will be submitted on behalf of the Planning, Environment and Sustainability portfolio holder. Some key proposals within the consultation are preparation of a local plan within a 30-month timescale, introduction of 3 gateway assessments to the plan making process, 2 mandatory consultation periods to be longer and more clearly defined, new approaches to engagement to replace existing narrow and ineffective practices, the plan's vision to serve as a golden thread throughout the strategy, digital templates to be introduced to help authorities prepare their new style plans, reduction in the amount of evidence required to develop a plan and defend it at examination, an introduction of a requirement to assist with certain plan making, and removal of supplementary planning documents and introduction of supplementary plans. I think that's about it in terms of...
Thank you very much. The way I propose to do this is we will take comments. If you can refer to the exact point in the consultation that you wish to comment on, then that will help Rob, but Rob will minute our debate and points we wish to make generally, and then they will form the basis of what we will send to the portfolio holder to help her and the cabinet define the final response that we make to the government on this important issue. I think I said in when we had our pre-meeting on Teams last week that I want to see a planning system that is robust, efficient, but a lot quicker than with one we've got at the moment. I think planning reform is long overdue in this country, so we need to get on with it. And I think some of these proposals help. I think our response help. We've got expert officers who are having to work with this antediluvian system for some years now, and we managed to make it work somehow. But that, I think, is down to not only the skill of our officers, but also elected members and local government to make this creaking system work. Okay, who wants to kick off with this? I thought you might, William. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, I sent an email out with detailed comments, so I won't go through all that. I did feel that from the way the responses came through, I've seen this through another organisation, and we're interpreting this very differently. This is quite, this is going to make our plan making process massively shorter. And we're going to have to do nothing like the detail. A lot of these, our policies will all be written in national policy, so we just have to refer to them. And it's like it's like the clouds breaking, the sun coming through, that suddenly we're not duplicating at multiple levels, long turgid documents that make it a nightmare just for everyone to interpret. You've got to be an expert to find your way through all the nonsense. So I think there's stuff to be really welcomed there. And like the chair and others nodding around the table, I'd love to see a process that can be done in 30 months. So I think we should sort of take the stance of not saying, oh, we can't do it, it was completely unrealistic. We should say we support it and we're going to do it, and we should gear ourselves up to do it. So it's a sort of very positive approach to that I feel we should be taking. And there's another thing I said that where I think that I think we're so afraid of the rule that you're not allowed to, that infrastructure contributions are not to be treated as a tax. We're really, really afraid of that. And we veer away from the pound signs and the money. And I think we've got to, if we're going to put our infrastructure deficit right, we've got to address it straight on and urge that there is some thought that the new process is moving away from viability and they're just doing everything on a percentage of gross development value. I think we should be saying that we still need the viability in there and that we should be able to load the infrastructure requirements on. This is not taxing it. We should load the infrastructure requirements on. Then if the ship is sinking, then the developer can come to us with a viability argument and we can look at it. And that's the system that's already there. And I think it would be a pity if that was lost. So we shouldn't be, in our response, veering away from the money side. We should embrace it. And in fact, we should try and have this strengthening it so that we can get better at collecting those contributions.
I think one point I just want to make about the 30-month time scale. I think that it's worth pointing out that the early engagement, which is shown in the new plan making process timeline for 4 months, isn't included in that 30-month window. So you get automatically 34 months. There is then also if once you reach the examination stage of your local plan, the consultation says that you can add an additional up to 3 months for a modifications consultation. So if you add that on as well, we're already at 37 months before anything else is taken into account. So I think that it's on the face of it, when you then go into a bit more of the detail, it's not just 30 months. There's a lot more to it as well, which is something that we have flagged in the draft response. And the point about the national development management policies, I think it's hard for officers to make to advise members on that point, because we don't have the detail of what national development management policies will entail at the moment. Government have said there will be an additional consultation on that, so it's really hard to know what impact that's going to have on how quickly we can produce these local plans when we don't have a clear picture of everything. And I think that's true for some of the other matters through the consultation as well. The point about viability, looking to someone else for some help with. I think Simon will pick
Simon's
that one up. Thank you.
waving to say that he wants to contribute. So Simon.
Oh, yes, I will be brief, Chair. In terms of the approach that Councillor Sunnox is advocating, there's obviously quite a sea change of difference fundamentally between Section 106 and the SIL tariff. A tariff-based approach is exactly as you summarised. Some degree it is a tax, and it's a more blunt tool from that approach with a spending schedule set out in the regulations. So normally we would always expect allocated sites to be viable, and that is a fundamental basis for that. So in terms of viability, that will be done at the plan making stage already. So we shouldn't be bringing forward allocations that aren't viable anyway. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody? Do you want to come back briefly? Yeah.
Sorry, this is about our response. And at the moment, we've just said it's a tax, we don't want anything to do with it, or something along those lines. And I'm suggesting a more robust approach along the lines in my email. Similarly, with we've said that we're frightened of the 30-month thing. And I don't think we should be saying that. We should be gearing ourselves up to it. So two changes to the response I'm suggesting, which I hope you'll at least consider. Thank you.
Just for the benefit of the recording, Councillor Sunnox sent an email with detailed responses. Obviously, you can't go into too much detail here, but you might want to make that more widely available to all councillors so that they can distribute it amongst their residents if necessary. Anybody else wish to contribute on this? Richard?
So I just wanted to grumble about the repeated use of the golden thread. That immediately brought to mind the Building Safety Bill. So I then spent about 20 minutes trying to work out what the connection was, and there doesn't appear to actually be one. But yeah, that's personal grumble.
Yep. Councillor Smith?
Yeah, and I think I'm generally in agreement with what's been said, though anything that speeds up the process is good. And I've always worked on the basis that where developments aren't viable, you have to look at the value of the land. And some sort of land development tax would be an awful lot better as an alternative possibly than to go through this viability. So if your land gets planning permission, that then incurs a tax liability when it's developed, and that then would pay for the infrastructure. But that's probably way beyond the scope of this paper, so I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Sunnox, just make sure that your comments are more widely distributed, especially to the Cabinet, because they are the ones who are going to make the official response on behalf of the City Council.
I sent it to this committee,
yeah,
and I just copied it to Councillor Small, yeah, and Councillor Luxford-Vaughan. Yes.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So, but you want it to the Cabinet too, do you?
Well, Councillor Luxford-Vaughan can
yes,
send it on to her Cabinet colleagues, and when they discuss it, then they can our final response. But I think we're generally agreed, I hope, as a committee, that I don't always agree with Councillor Sunnox, but he always makes interesting points. But what we surely are agreed on, that we must have a better planning system in this country. We are a laughingstock around the world, especially in continental Europe, about how long it takes to go from application stage to actually spades in the ground. And we've got to get better at it, else we're going to fall behind economically, and we know that we're what that means in terms of a better society, a greener society, a fairer society. So, you know, it's all, people might think the planning system doesn't make that much difference. We know it does. And what I would say, though, Councillor Sunnox, in addition, and Councillor Luxford-Vaughan and the Cabinet might want to take this on board as well, if government want to do this and it makes it quicker, and I think it does, I think they're going down the right lines, local government needs the resources to make it work. Because we can't do 30 months with the staffing and resources we've got at the moment. We'll need better resources, better resourcing. I know every government under-resources local government, of any political colour, but they want us to deliver some of this stuff, and we can't deliver it unless we have the human and financial resources to do it. You want to come back from?
I want to just agree. Rare occasion. particularly as these 3 gateways, is another one of the points, that they're asking for 3 gateway reviews, and we're going to have to pay for them. So that's coming out of our own pockets. And I think part of I put it in the thing, that we should feedback that, do we really need 3 gateways? And then I'm a little bit nervous because perhaps officers feel we do. I don't know.
3 gateways?
I think what is a theme throughout this consultation is we need more detail. And I think that's also true for the gateway assessments. I think there's lots of questions around how they will work. The consultation does set out some sort of general issues that might be considered at each of the gateway assessments, and the principle of those being introduced to speed up the examination process is supported. But until we know a bit more about how they work, I agree, we do. There is uncertainty there, and particularly the cost is one thing as well that has been raised by, unsurprisingly, a number of local authorities. And if by introducing the gateway assessments it reduces the cost of the examination, so the overall bill, if you like, still goes down, then of course we would support that. But if including the gateway assessments doesn't speed up your examination, we still have to pay for both. Obviously that's not sustainable, and goes back to the previous points just made around resources. So it's all we need a lot more detail on a lot of these things as well. It's difficult.
Thank you. We will certainly ask for that. I'm sure Councillor Luxford-Bourne has heard all those comments. You will get the minutes of these when Rob will produce them, I'm sure, in his usual quick and efficient manner. And then I think you've got to get the response in by the deadline of the 18th of October. So thank you, committee. We agree on those providing, I think we'll see this. We'll provide comments on the basis of the debate. Can we give you nods all around about that? And the Cabinet, Councillor Luxford-Bourne, will then send it off to the government. Okay, I think we're done. I think that's it. Thank you very much for attending tonight. Sorry it was such a long meeting, but I think we covered some valuable points, and have a safe journey home. Let's hope the traffic has subsided, but hopefully something came by sustainable transport methods. Thank you very much. See you all soon.
Recording stop.